Yeah, welcome to this talk, Authenticate and Authorize Users Your Way. My name is Alexander Schwartz, or just Alex. I'm a principal software engineer at Red Hat, and I'm also a maintainer of Keycloak. Just out of curiosity, who has been using Keycloak or experimenting with it in the room? Okay, some hands up. Who is experienced with OpenID Connect in some kind of way? Yeah, a little bit more. Whoever created a URL with some URL parameters in the room? Okay, that's probably almost the whole audience. And the good news is OpenID Connect is all about building URLs and getting some GET requests back to your application. And I am quite sure you will learn at least one thing new about OpenID Connect today. So I'm happy to be here in Zurich. The first time I'm here. I'm actually spending another 2 days hiking in the Jura. So yeah, it's great to be here. And here at DevOps Days. So what did I bring today? A little introduction, motivation about this talk, having some practical authentication by example. Then we'll be starting with some slides first, but then will be a demo. So, and then some other things you will also need. This is like a talk being prepared for developers, and we will really take the perspective of a developer who wants to get authentication done and some authorization on the way as well. So authentication is about answering the question, who are you? That one request that arrives at my application, I want to figure out what are they about to do. But OpenID Connect is usually, the talk is about, this is how you log in users. But the question is usually starting way before that, like I want to know if the user already logged in, for example. And we will show that, how that works. You've seen this diagram. I nicked it from the Quarkus webpage. It's a flow diagram, yeah, and swim lanes and whatnot. Well, but it doesn't really take the application developer's perspective. We're not using this diagram here. We will really take an application developer's perspective, what's happening in OpenID Connect and how to put it to use. And well, as an Keycloak maintainer, I will also point out some, I think, the good parts of Keycloak that you can use in your day-to-day life. Either using Keycloak as your primary source of identifying users, or maybe as an intermediate of sitting between some other cloud providers and whatnot. And OpenID Connect can do so many things. Are you already logged in? You can register user. You can, with Keycloak at least, you can have a forgot password flow. You can change passwords, manage accounts. All that stuff is handled with your identity provider at some point, and you don't need to take care of that in your application, which I think is great. So let's dive into details how to achieve that. So we are doing a demo, so we have some actors in here. We have an end user. The end user hopefully has some credentials or sets them up in the process. And what they do is usually they operate a web browser. Even if they have a native app and you want to use OpenID Connect, at some point you will usually start a web browser, at least for a short period of time, to authenticate the user. You have an identity provider, or OpenID provider, OP, was the acronym here. It shows a login screen. It can validate credentials and then issue and validate tokens, which is, well, doing all the hard security stuff, I'd say. And you have a relaying party, or so usually called a client application, that can show a web app, interacts with the OpenID provider and other relaying parties, and wants a user to authenticate eventually. So those are the actors. In my case here, it's a single-page application written in Vue, running in a browser. You can also have it running on the server side. There's just a small difference that the application running in a browser will not have any confidential credentials to authenticate to the identity provider. If it would be running on the server, you can give it some credentials. But for the demo as of today, it's not making much of a difference. Keycloak is now about a good 10 years old. The initial commit was in 2013. We're a cloud-native computing foundation incubating projects since April 2023. We Apache license, which is both open source and commercial usage-friendly, to say, and we have about 26,000 GitHub stores with all the users who tried Keycloak and liked it. So OpenID Connect really starts with a URL. and this URL is called .wellknown slash OpenID, .wellknown slash OpenID dash configuration, and it's self-describing, or a way of an identity OpenID provider to self-describe it, what capabilities it has. And it's actually very, very interesting. So if you have an issuer, maybe an Okta, an Entra ID, or Google, or maybe a Keycloak, to figure out what features are supported and maybe what features are enabled or disabled. So it's really a source of great information. And what you see then here is you have an issuer. That's actually also the URL where this .wellknown slash OpenID configuration is appended to. You have an authorization endpoint, a token endpoint. And there was also the other talk earlier today where they told you, well, in the configuration of your application, you usually put in only the issuer URL because your application will learn about all the other details from this endpoint, which is very, very handy and allows like a little bit of self-configuration of an application and to figure out what is allowed in an environment and what is not allowed in an environment. So I prepared a little demo application here. And the demo application, okay, I don't have very much space here, so I probably need to use my trackpad here. So okay, come on. So I have a server info endpoint, which is then called here. And what I will also do, I will open my server console. And what I did here, which is usually quite nice, I filter my request to only the HTTP queries. So when I refresh this page again, well, I did some debugging yesterday and the breakpoint is still there. So thank you, Chrome, for that. So I will see basically all the only the HTTP requests that are relevant in this case. Come on. So it pulls this information, which is good. And for example, yeah, I can see here, I can now log in, and this user endpoint also supports logging in with a pushed authorization request, but yeah, let's see. So I'm not logged in, and the first thing actually what the application does when I refresh here, you will see that it is redirecting myself. For that I should probably do a pre-serve log here. It's doing a redirect to a specific URL saying prompt equals none. You take a URL that's part of the authentication. You take this this well-known info endpoint, take the authorization endpoint out of it, put a URL in there where you want to get redirected back to, and then put a prompt equals none in there. And that will tell you, is the user already logged in? Yes or no? Which is handy. So you can present a starting page, tell the user about the products, and then have a button in there telling the user that they want to that they can now log in. All right. So this is the standard login page of Keycloak, and what you see here, yeah, it's a login screen. And if I go back to this screen, well, it doesn't offer me any way to register. When I now go to Keycloak, I can enable registering of new users. And for example, here I go to the realm settings, go to the user registration, enable this. This is also saved immediately. And when I go back to this single page application, oh yeah, so I did something wrong. I was in the wrong realm. That's something happened if you have multiple realms. So I go again to the right realm, enable the user self-registration here. I go back to my app, I press a refresh. Yeah, and then now there's a register here because the server info now, it contains another endpoint that's part of OpenID Connect, telling you, okay, this is the URL to use, or that we support actually this user self-registration. So we can go here and register a new user, which is then adding some information here. So I can create a user here, putting my real name and email address here. Oh, it's not going to be recorded. That's fine. So, and I register. And I'm registered. And actually, when you use this real OpenID Connect flow, I registered and I'm already logged in my application. So depending on your real needs, you can maybe make a break in here and maybe verify the email address, or you would require the user to put in their passwords again. But sometimes maybe if you're an e-commerce site, you really make this registration of users really, really seamless. And this is what you can do with this OpenID Connect standard here. I can then log out, and logging out, well, let's see what we have here. So we registered. I can log out and log in again. So log out is another URL that's part of the server info. If I log in, I put in my username and password. And I'm logged in, which is good. So what else do I need? I want to figure out if the user is still logged in. And what you see here, that's again part of OpenID Connect. There's a little tiny iframe in here. So iframes are, I think, from the Stone Age of web browsers. But they're very, very handy to, and actually there's part of the standard of OpenID Connect how to figure out if a user is still logged in. So with browsers getting more secure, and that cookies work within only the same realm and whatnot. So eventually, maybe this will only work if you have running Keycloak on the same domain as your application. But hey, it's a standard. It's a lot of people are running Keycloak, and really, what you can achieve by this, you can you log out in one tab, and in another tab you have an open application. The application will communicate with the iframe and will then log out the user as well. Yeah. So looking back of the code that's happening here in the background, so the user is already logged in. We saw that with a prompt equals none. When I want to register a new user, I use the same URL, again the authorization endpoint, with a prompt create that showed the user this registration form we saw earlier. And then this is actually a new feature that we added in Keycloak 26.1. But the standard was around for quite a bit of a time. In earlier versions of Keycloak, you will need to call a custom endpoint that wasn't OIDC compliant. If I really, really want to log in the user and give them a prompt, that's then prompt equals login in the same authorization endpoint URL. And what I then get back is a code, and I post this code with some other parameters to the token endpoint, and then finally get this ID token, access token, and refresh token that it will then use to figure out who the user is with that first ID token. With the second token, I can use it to call other endpoints, for example, some user info, or I can refresh the token as well. I talked about this iframe, and again, this check session iframe URL, it's again part of this well-known endpoint and this JSON being returned there. And what I then do, I send a JavaScript send message to that iframe, and then it retrieves some information if the session is still valid. If, it will also tell me maybe if there's no session, the session has changed, maybe go again through the flow, figure out what's currently the case. So that's really neat for the application to figure all this things out. Is that like the session state I see here? This is the same session state I received down here at the lower right. So from this token endpoint, there's at some point also a session state, and this session state is then used to communicate with the iframe. Refreshing the access token, well, for that I need the refresh token with a token endpoint. The token endpoint is again in this JSON I retrieved at the beginning. I receive a new set of entries here. And when I then get the user info endpoint is also defined. It will get me all the information about the user, and what I do, I send the access token to that endpoint. So yeah, the user info endpoint, I retrieved the information here already. It tells me, for example, there's the subject, so it shows here to have the UUID in here. I have a name, also have an email address. The email address is verified. It's not yet verified because I didn't send out a verification by email here. That's again something that Keycloak can handle for you. We will see that in a second, which is good. And when I log out from all applications at the end, I can use this end session endpoint with a logout post URI, passing it an ID token hint. I think that's one of the things that was added like some years ago at least already, but if you don't put this hint in here in the URL, you will see a prompt like, are you sure you want to log out? Is this really the session you want to log out from? But if an application passes on this ID token hint, it will, this makes then really sure that, this is not like a cross-site request forgery or whatnot, just a link that somebody tricked the user to click on. So then only if this ID token hint is there, the application, the identity provider will then really log out the user without any additional questions. Right. So so that's the practical authentication by example. Maybe a good time to ask some questions. No questions so far? Yeah. If you have questions, please keep them coming. All right. So the other things that you will also need when you're running an identity provider, want to do some authentication in your application. Something you can do, so you can enforce a second factor authentication. So the thing is, you redirect again to the authorization endpoint, and something you can do, you paste on these ACR_values in here. And then you continue as normal with a login. So the thing is, you might have an application out there. Maybe you're very super secure Grafana that everybody is only allowed to access by, again, entering the second factor. You can pass on this information in a URL to the identity provider, these ACR values equals 2, and then you have an authentication flow that really checks this ACR value and makes some decision on that. So this decision could be, I don't know, decision could be like use a second factor, configure how old this, maybe if they previously used a second factor, how many seconds ago this might still be valid. All this information is then used to that. It involves some configuring some authentication flows in Keycloak that might take a bit too long here in the demo. So I'm skipping that in the demo. And that was actually one of the features we added in Keycloak 26.1. For some applications, it's very difficult to, maybe it's an off-the-shelf application that is, doesn't allow to configure this additional parameters added to the URL. So what you can do in Keycloak 26.1, there's now an alternative where you configure that in Keycloak itself, in the client configuration, that whenever an application, whenever somebody tries to access the application, there's no need anymore to configure that in the application, but it will be like fixed, configured for this application every time somebody opens the application that is then used. If you build your own application, you can really choose when and where you want to add this parameter, and when and where you require a second factor to be added to the user authentication. And once this is all done, you will have this ACR included in the ID token. So when your thing is, you're really redirecting to a URL, and anybody can change things that are in this URL, which is scary in a way. But again, with a application running in the browser, that's not really under your control anyway. But maybe with your server-side application, you want to take more full control over all that. And what you then can do is do a pushed authorization request, so that you don't pass things as a URL with a GET request, but if you have a server-side application, you have a pushed authentication request, you put everything that you normally put in this URL and do the GET request and redirect to it. Instead, you would post this information directly to the identity provider over TLS, not involving anything about the client. You retrieve from the server a token that you would then pass on to the URL, and then the caller would not be able to actually see the values. They will not be able to tamper with the values. Still, you should really check what is then being returned from the server. Something that is not part of OpenID Connect, but I think it's quite cool, is at some point you might have your application, it's all ready, and you want to have the user to manage their own data. What you can then do, you can redirect to the account console, and the user can change all this information in here. So let's see, move over here a bit. So you have the personal information that the user can edit. You have account security, where you sign in, you can change your password. Some device activities, like who's then currently logged in, what's happening there. I can terminate the session here, which applications have access to my account. So this is all there in the account console, and then there's also a redirect back to the application. So yeah, and we are checking that this redirect actually works and is registered for that application, so we don't do an open redirect. So that's that part. The thing is, with Keycloak, what we also do, we offer this account console, I would say, in a very modular fashion. So what you can do there's again the same URL, and you have the option to add some KC_action parameters here. For example, update profile. So this is the chance where you can say, okay, I want to update my profile. Well, Keycloak will then do, okay, that's probably a good idea to re-authenticate because you didn't do that for probably 30 seconds. That's the default. And then I can put in my address here or change my data. And once I submit it, I'm probably done and redirect back to my application. So it's a nice way to do this. And for that, we have lots of different options that offer you the, we call it application initiated actions in Keycloak. So users can update their password, they can delete their account, they can configure a time-based one-time password, they can do a Passkeys registration here or passwordless authentication. So all these actions that are then part of the application console are also available as a modular fashion, which makes it really, really nice to really have maybe some buttons, maybe some links in your application to link to exactly that action that you want to get in there. So another, what we added in Keycloak 26.2, one of these actions was missing there. There's also the way that you can verify an email address. For example, if I go here to the user token, it tells me in one of the claims here, the email has not been verified. And by adding this KC action, well, the application can now see email is not verified. Maybe I'm happy. Maybe I'm happy up to a certain point where the user wants to register for a newsletter. But the moment they want to register for a newsletter, I want to make sure that this email has been verified. What I can do then, redirect the user to verify their email address. So again, back at Keycloak, I can send a verification email. This verification email then turns up here. The user clicks on the link to verify the email, and then the user info shows this email has been verified, and now I can really do this one click to register the user for the newsletter they asked for. So that's the nice thing, to have all these elements modular as actions that you can really interact with your identity provider in this modular way and get the things done that you need to do in some practical examples. What you can also do, so in Keycloak, was it 25 or 26? We built in, I'd say, well, a little form designer, where you can really specify these are the attributes of a user. For example, I want something that I did already here as a preparation. So as a preparation, I configured my Keycloak here in the user, sorry, not in the realm settings. In the user profile, I went here and configured a field that I called formatted, which is like pre-configured to contain a pre-formatted address. And what I did here, well, it is now part of the registration screen, but it's optional in here. But I said, okay, it should be required field, but only if a specific scope is requested. So if the address is requested. So an application in this case, so let's see. When I then ask for a specific scope, the address scope, it will become required. And if this address field is not set yet, I need to specify it because I didn't do it earlier. I submit this information, and now as I requested this scope to be included for the application, it's now being included as a formatted address in here. So this is something that we called user profiles. It was preview for quite a long time, but then last year it was fully supported. And again, all this information that I manage here in the Keycloak admin console, like which fields are there, which when should be this required, which scope is it, who can edit it, who can view this information. Probably admin should be able to view it all the time. I configure an input type. So I'd say it's more like a form designer now, and the same information is then available when you register as a new user, when you as an admin go to the user settings and see them if the user goes to the account console and manage their data. So everything here is in sync. You can also use it, for example, if you connect Keycloak to an LDAP provider or another identity provider and have lots of attributes that come in over that way, to hide all the attributes that shouldn't be visible to the user, shouldn't be visible to an admin, or also decide if they're read-only or even writable. And these scopes are very handy to manage these fields and also allow you like incremental profiling of users and adding the data only when it's necessary, to not like overwhelm the user with too many questions and asking them for the address when you don't need it yet. Something you can also do is configuring the login flow a bit more. For example, there might be user group, well, again, you might be doing DevOps, maybe you have a Grafana running in your application, in your enterprise. And, well, only some people are allowed to access Grafana. And what you can then do, well, you can maybe just don't give them the proper roles to to go to Grafana and whatnot, but you can go one step further by configuring it in the login flow. So there's an extension restricting the client auth, so that already when Grafana redirects to Keycloak, Keycloak will check if the user has any permissions at all to access Grafana, and if they don't have these permissions, they will already see an error message within Keycloak. So they're not redirected to Grafana, where they might not see the proper information, what to do next, who to contact if they want to get access to this application. There are a lot of more community contributed extensions at keycloak.org/extensions. So give them a try them out. They are maintained by the community. They usually live in their own GitHub repositories, so you can use GitHub issues and discussions on these extensions to see maybe if it's not fitting your need, or maybe even extending it. Right. So yeah, that's almost it. So I'd say, well, standards everywhere, at least where we extend them with Keycloak a bit. So I'd say with all this OpenID Connect, how you register a user, if you want to check if it's logged in, if you force a login, if you this ACR level, if you can enforce a second factor, all that is part of OpenID Connect. And it's a great standard with offering lots of functionality to application developers. I really recommend you to use an OpenID Connect library to do the heavy lifting. For example, if you do all the redirects, checking the codes, making sure there's a nonce, like only be used once token in there. There are some signatures to be checked. So yes, please use an OpenID Connect library. At the same time, if you understand what can be passed in the URL, you understand better what this library can provide you with in functionality. The standards, all the prompt elements are standards. This KC_action are actually a custom functionality of the modular, I'd say, account console. We could change a password, verify an email address, update the profile, which I think comes very handy. And these scopes are usually used to, well, grant access to maybe specific applications or permissions. In this example, we used them to trigger some fields to become required in specific scopes, and then also to map specific data into the ID token that wasn't mapped there earlier into the scopes. In Keycloak, we also use it, for example, to support organizations. So if you have one big realm with lots of organizations in there, you can also use scopes to check if a user is part of an organization, or even have a list of all the organizations the user is in Keycloak as well. So please try out the Keycloak preview features and provide feedback. So they can eventually be supported. So we actually have nightly builds of Keycloak. There will be, well, scheduled for 31st of March, there's going to be the Keycloak 26.2 release is scheduled. We hope it all goes according to plan. And then this release will include, for example, this new functionality to also verify the email address using the KC action parameter. These are the links about Keycloak, also the server features, if you want to enable some of the features. If you go, in the demo, I enabled 2 preview features. OpenID Connect Core, if you really want to go to the specs give you information on, well, explaining the parameters, also give you an idea how to connect different entries of this well-known endpoint to specific standards. The demo code is all online on my personal GitHub repo. The JavaScript library I used in the demo is the Panva OpenID client, which also supports the latest, let's say, advanced techniques like Pixie and also Depop, proof of possession when it comes to that. So I've done other demos on that. So if you're a Java developer, there's a Nimbus SDK. So if you want to do, I should have put a link in here. The Nimbus SDK is something that you can really use to interact with an OpenID Connect server in a good way. And I did other demos with that. It worked very well with Keycloak and as well with other OpenID Connect providers. So that's me. If you want to contact me after the talk, I'm here around. Actually have some Keycloak stickers with me. So if you want to grab one for you or maybe some colleagues back in the office, get some stickers with me. That's it for now. Thank you very much.